Muscles of eyelids are orbicularis oculi, corrugator supercilii, occipitofrontalis, and levator palpebrae superioris. The orbicularis oculi has three parts: the orbital part, the palpebral part, and the lacrimal part. The orbital part originates from the medial palpebral ligament, the frontal process of the maxilla, and the nasal process of the frontal bone. It encircles around the orbital margin, with upper and lower fibers being continuous at the lateral orbital margin. Some fibers insert on the skin over the eyebrow, and the upper fibers meet and fuse with the frontal belly of the occipitofrontalis muscle, opposing the action of the frontalis. The palpebral part originates from the medial palpebral ligament and the medial border of the orbit above and below the medial palpebral ligament, inserting at the lateral palpebral raphe. The lacrimal part originates from the lacrimal fascia, the lacrimal crest, and the lateral surface of the lacrimal bone. It divides into upper and lower portions that enter the eyelids, attaching to the tarsal plate and lacrimal canaliculi, with most fibers extending laterally and decussating at the lateral palpebral raphe. The nerve supply comes from the temporal and zygomatic branches of the facial nerve. The actions of the orbital part lock the eyelids, acting as a strong sphincter of the orbit and opposing the action of the frontalis muscle. The palpebral part shuts the eyelids tightly during blinking and sleeping, while the lacrimal part pulls the eyelids medially and dilates the lacrimal sac. Muscles of the nose. They are procerus, nasalis, and depressor septi. The procerus, or pyramidalis nasi, is a small muscle which is found superficial towards the nasal bone and operates while a person frowns. In order to create transverse wrinkles superior to the bridge of the nose, the procerus pulls the medial margin of the eyebrows inferior. The procerus muscle arises via the fascia enveloping the inferior portion of the nasal bones and the upper part of the lateral nasal cartilages. It attaches on the skin in the middle of the eyebrows and the lower portion of the center of the forehead. Its fibers merge with fibers of the frontalis in the same section, and it is constant with the frontal belly of the occipitofrontalis muscle of the scalp. It produces transverse wrinkles across the bridge of the nose if frowning and helps in protecting eyes from the glare of the sun. The nasalis is a muscle of the nose that contracts and dilates the nasal cartilages. It is made up of two parts, transverse or compressor and alar or dilator parts. The transverse part, also known as compressor nares, arises from the maxilla close to the nasal notch. Its fibers continue superiorly and medially, spreading into a thin aponeurosis across the bridge of the nose, where it is continuous with the muscle of the opposite side. It compresses the nostrils and may completely close them. The alar part, also known as dilator nasalis, arises from the maxilla superior towards the lateral incisor and is inserted into the alar cartilage. The buccal branch of the facial nerve innervates the nasalis muscle. The transverse part compresses the nasal aperture as in deep inspiration, while the alar part dilates the nasal aperture and also expresses as a sign of anger. Understanding our bodies is not just about biology. It's about appreciating the intricate systems that keep us alive and thriving. Each day is a reminder of the marvels of medicine and the importance of taking care of our health. Muscles around the oral fissure consist of a sphincteric component formed by the orbicularis aureus and a dilator component formed by a number of facial muscles which radiate outwards from the lips. About 9 muscles converge around the oral fissure from each side and intermingle to form the orbicularis oris. Muscles attached to the upper lip are 3 in number. They are levator labii superioris alla equinasi, levator labii superioris, and zygomaticus minor. Muscles attached to the lower lip is 1, the depressor labii inferioris. Converging to the angle of mouth are 5 muscles: levator anguli oris, zygomaticus major, buccinator, depressor anguli oris, and risorius. All these muscles interlace to form a palpable nodular mass, the modiolus, which is situated just lateral to the angle of mouth opposite the upper second premolar tooth. Levator labii superioris, alleque nasi, arises from the maxilla and is inserted to the ala of the nose by one slip and to the skin of the upper lip by another slip. Its action is to elevate and avert the upper lip and dilate the nostril. Levator labii superioris arises from the lower margin of the orbit just above the infraorbital foramen and is inserted into the upper lip. Its action is to elevate and avert the upper lip and increase the nasolabial furrow. Zygomaticus minor is a small slip of muscle extending from the zygomatic bone to the upper lip. Its action is to elevate and evert the upper lip and increase the nasolabial furrow. Levator angulioris arises from the maxilla below the infraorbital foramen and is inserted into the angle of mouth, where it intermingles with other muscles and extends further into the skin of lower lip up to the middle line. Infraorbital plexus of vessels and nerves intervene between the levator anguli oris and levator labii superioris. Its actions include raising the angle of mouth and combined actions of levator anguli oris. Levator labii superioris and zygomaticus minor muscles accentuate the nasolabial furrow, which is an expression of sadness. Zygomaticus major arises from the zygomatic bone and is inserted to the angle of mouth. Its actions include drawing the angle of mouth upward and laterally as in laughing, and spasm of this muscle in tetanus produces a facial appearance known as risus sardonicus. Depressor labii inferioris arises from the oblique line of the mandible, passes upward and medially as a quadrilateral sheet, and is inserted into the skin of lower lip. Its actions include drawing the lower lip downward and somewhat laterally, and helping in the expression of irony. Depressor angulioris arises from the posterior part of oblique line of the mandible and is inserted into the skin of lower lip. Its action is to retract the angle of mouth. Mentalis is the muscle of the chin. Each muscle is conical, arises from the incisive fossa of the mandible, and is inserted into the skin of the chin. Its actions include puckering the chin and protruding the lower lip in drinking or in expression of disdain. Buccinator is the muscle of cheek, thin and quadrilateral. It arises from the outer surface of alveolar processes of maxilla and mandible, opposite the three molar teeth. The pterygomandibular raphe, which separates the buccinator from the superior constrictor muscle of pharynx, and extends from the pterygoid hamulus to the mandible behind the third molar tooth, and from a fibrous band that extends from the pterygoid hamulus to the maxillary tuberosity. The gap above the band transmits the tendon of tensor, veli palatini, into the soft palate. On reaching the angle of mouth, the muscle fibers are arranged into upper, intermediate, and lower groups and are inserted as follows. Upper or maxillary fibers pass straight to the upper lip. Lower or mandibular fibers pass straight to the lower lip. Intermediate or raphe fibers undergo chiasmatic decussation at the modiolus. Upper fibers of this group go to the lower lip and lower fibers to the upper lip. The outer surface of the buccinator is covered by an areolar membrane called the buccopharyngeal fascia, whereas its inner surface is covered by the mucous membrane of the vestibule. Structures piercing the buccinator include the parotid duct, buccal branch of mandibular nerve, and 4 or 5 molar mucus glands lying on the buccopharyngeal fascia around the parotid duct. Its actions include flattening the cheek against the gum and teeth, and helping in mastication by preventing accumulation of food in the vestibule of mouth, and forcibly expelling the air between the lips from the inflated vestibule, as in blowing a trumpet. Facial muscles and emotional expressions include frowning, where the corrugator supercilii creates vertical wrinkles of the forehead and the procerus forms transverse wrinkles across the root of the nose. In surprise, horror, or fright, the frontalis muscle elevates the eyebrows and creates transverse wrinkles of the forehead. For anger, the dilator nares and depressor septi dilate the anterior nasal apertures and depress the mobile part of the septum. Sadness is expressed by the levator angulioris, levator labii superioris, and zygomaticus minor, which accentuate the nasolabial furrow, while the depressor angulioris draws the angle of the mouth downward and laterally. Laughing involves the zygomaticus major, which draws the angle of the mouth upward and laterally. Irony is expressed by the depressor labii inferioris, which draws the angle of the mouth downward and somewhat laterally. Grinning is achieved by the risorius, which retracts the angle of the mouth laterally. Disdain is shown through the mentalis, which puckers the chin and protrudes the lower lip. Each half of the face is supplied by 13 nerves, 1 motor, and the rest sensory. 11 sensory nerves are derived from the branches of the trigeminal nerve, with 1 from the great auricular nerve of the cervical plexus. Motor and sensory nerves communicate richly in the face, forming plexuses, with the infraorbital plexus being the most elaborate. The motor supply is derived from the facial nerve, which supplies all facial muscles except the masseter. The facial nerve appears in the face radiating through the anterior border of the parotid gland as 5 terminal branches. The temporal branch passes upward and forward in front of the auricle and across the zygomatic arch, supplying the intrinsic muscles of the lateral surface of the auricle, auricularis, anterior and superior muscles, upper part of orbicularis oculi, frontalis, and corrugator supercilii. The zygomatic branch runs along the zygomatic arch and supplies the lower part of orbicularis oculi. The buccal branch consists of superficial and deep parts. The superficial branches supply the procerus, while the deep branches subdivide into upper and lower sets. The upper buccal passes forward above the parotid duct and supplies zygomaticus major and minor, levator anguli oris, and levator labii superioris.